there are a few untalked about practices and habits that we can do in our sewing routines that will just make our sewing lives so much better. And let's talk about 5 good sewing practices that you really could be doing to make your sewing life just a smoother process, because that's what we all want, right? Sewing friends, welcome. It is always delightful to have you here again. I've talked a lot about different habits, routines, sewing practices in the past, and it never gets tiresome, does it? Because some actual new good sewing practices, so to say, have come to me in the past little while, and I know it is my duty to share those with you so that you might be able to implement those into your sewing routine too, because these are things that are, as I said, not really talked about. They're not part of tutorials or do this in sewing lists or anything like that. These are just kind of the things that you do by habit, by practice. Subconsciously, you'll do these types of things or just have them in part of your routine that will make your life so much better and sometimes safer. And just makes the process, the workflow of sewing a lot easier and smoother. And when there's less hurdles in the way, we all know that is so much better because then there's just less things to have to worry about. Trying to install that zip for the 3rd time is hard enough already without having to think about all these different things as well that we can put on habit, on autopilot, so we don't have to think about these simple little tips. Okay, are you ready? I said some of these are new to me too, and the first one is stick to one brand of thread if you can. This one came to me recently. You might have watched this video here where I got my new to me vintage Bernina and had a little issue with it when it blew up, and took it to my sewing machine repair guy, and we chatted about lots of things, and one of the first things he asked me was, what thread do you use? I was like, I don't know, the ones that I have in my stash, of course. Now, they come about because to me that means that why would he ask questions like that, right? The very first thing, what thread? And as we were talking deeper and deeper into thread and how it affects your sewing machine, because basically he is going to tension and adjust my sewing machine to the thread type that I usually use. Now, I mostly use Gutermann thread because it's the most available to me. But I do have some other ones. I mentioned that, and I use this beautiful all cotton Wonderfeel thread. It's just so beautifully, the stitches were just so nice and everything. He's like, why was that? And I thought, why is that? So every thread here is actually tensioned, how it's created has a different tension to it. And that's why some machines like some thread and not others. That is one of the reasons. And so having the same thread all through your collection, or at least only a couple of different types, when you find one that you like and that your machine likes, just stick to that brand and just get all of that brand, because then you won't have these random occurrences where the tension just seems wrong or your stitches just seem a bit weird. And I know I find that sometimes it's not a big deal, and when you're first getting started, this is such a minute detail that it doesn't matter. But as you get more and more experienced and looking for these different little things, you'll notice having the same thread all throughout will just minimize those weird occurrences where your stitches just look different, they feel different, the tension's just not looking right. You can set your machine to be with that thread type, and then that's it. It's done. You won't have any weird tension issues. Well, at least mostly. You can minimize that by keeping the one thread all throughout. And which leads on to the next one, is keeping the same thread for top and bottom. So your bobbin threads the same as your top threads. And so if you have the same brand, or at least maybe 2 different ones that you can, use in your collection and know which is which, it's quite easy to then know that you've got the same thread top and bottom. So you're generally going to go the same color, of course, but also the same, again, brand, the same type, so that the tension is the same. When your stitches are making the stitch, the bobbin thread and the top thread match exactly, and you won't, again, get any of those just weird tension stitching things that aren't a problem, but they're just not quite right. Help eliminate those. And when you have the one brand of thread. It makes it easy to keep the top and the bottom really the same because you only have one choice in which to fill your bobbin with, right? Marking your wrong side of your fabric with some chalk. Now this really smooths up your sewing process because, well, look, sometimes it's really obvious what is the right and the wrong side, but sometimes it's really not so obvious. But there is not a right and a wrong side. You at least want to be using the exact same side, whatever side it is, for your whole garment and not accidentally move one around. And it just takes a little bit of time, and it just is such an easy thing to do, is to just, with some chalk, make sure it's fabric chalk that will disappear, and you can just mark your wrong side, a little X, something like that, to really delineate, and it just makes it so much easier when it's so obvious which is the right and the wrong side. You're not second guessing yourself, you're not unpicking things because you sewed the wrong side to the right side, or vice versa. And just making it really clear and obvious just speeds up and smooths out your workflow, so you're not having to worry about something simple every time you pick up a new pattern piece, which is the right and the wrong side. So some good quality chalk and mark those. I feel I must add this one for safety, and that is a really good practice to have, is to drill it into yourself, foot off the foot pedal. Now I say this, I repeat this, I have it in flashing little, red signs in my videos for Vintage Sewing School, that when you do something, when you're sewing at the machine and you're about to say lift your foot, put your hands like right in, you've got your needle down, you're about to pivot, something like that, foot off the foot pedal before you put your hands anywhere near your machine. It's just one of those really good habits to get into, to make sure your foot is off the pedal entirely and on the floor before you, basically whenever you've stopped sewing, just to do that, because I know it only takes a tiny little fright from something or an accidental bump and you can sew it, and we won't go into what happens then. So just drill it into yourself, foot off the foot pedal every time that before you go and do something else other than sewing and put your hands near the machine. It's a really good habit, good sewing practice to put into your routine. I know you know why. Having a system for knowing what needle is on your machine and what you are using. So this one is a really good one, because we all know when you take off a new needle, and I do have many videos here on sewing machine needles and knowing when to change them and what sizes. And so you need different sizes and different types for different things. But what do you do when you take it out? You can't put it back in the case because you've used this one. So where do your used ones go? And then what type was this again? And what type did you even have in the machine? If you do know, it is written, if you can read that small, on the back here what size and everything it is, and something like Schmidt's do color code them these days, which is really nice. But generally you need a way to know what is on your machine so you don't forget what size it is and which ones you've used, and like processing. So it just save you so many needles and so much trouble. So I've had a few different systems in the past, but I wasn't quite happy with it. And I recently found this little tomato thing that has down the side here different types of needles, ballpoint, lightweight woven needle sizes, size 14, 90, size heavyweights, denim leather. There's probably a few that I would use that aren't on here, but it's not the best, but it's given me ideas to move forward. And then down the line is the hours or, spent. So only with sort of one use, you can put it at the top, and as you use it again, and you can move it down the bottom, and so it goes down and down, and so when it's quite well used down the bottom. Now it says purchase here. I'm a fan of always just taking your own notes, listening to the sound of the needle and feeling it to when it needs to be changed, rather than just after 26.5 hours of sewing. I like to just go by my ear and my feel. But it will help me know how long I've been using it for, which is wonderful, and then which one. And I've also thought about how to know what one is in the machine, is to actually then just get a colored pin, whatever color you like, and the one that's in the machine, you put it on what it is, and you'll know that the blue pin here is what is in your machine. So when you come to your next project, you'll think, what needle was in there? come to your little tomato, or you can make something like this. I'm thinking of making my own version. You'll know exactly what's in there and about how much use that particular needle has had too. Because if you want something super sharp one day, you'll know, maybe get a fresh one. I'm thinking of making my own little version of this that maybe hangs on the machine or something like that. And this is great, but there's probably a few different needle types that I might use that aren't on here, and so I'd want to put those somewhere. You could probably just like Nico pen over like this as well and just make your own, but something to keep track of the sewing machine needles just makes the process smoother. One more thing that you don't have to think about during your sewing project. Because we all know our sewing is hard enough already. Less things to think about is really good for both workflow and some for safety. I would love to hear your additional good sewing practices that you might have for us. Leave them down below, and remember, I'm going to link up the other videos that I've talked about, a bunch of different ones before, that I think you'll really enjoy those videos as well to follow on from this one. But leave your own comments below because, well, we're a sewing community here and we all love learning from each other. I want to hear yours. Okay, until next time, my sewing friends, happy sewing. Bye.